gonna get, okay. Now we'll have it. There we go.
Okay. Sorry for the technical difficulties. So we had a discussion back in September Council, and we had a work session. What we're going to do tonight is go through the comments that North Front Range staff have developed. The agenda we have is deceptively short. We're going to start with a brief review of the background behind the rule that is being proposed by the Transportation Commission and CDOT to develop greenhouse gas budgets for transportation plans. Review what is in that rule and the rulemaking schedule. And then the bulk of what we're going to talk about tonight is that comment letter that was sent out in the handouts email that you received yesterday afternoon. And then at the end, we'll have discussion and hopefully action to approve a set of comments to submit to the TC on this proposed rule. So the background is two pieces of legislation. In 2019, House Bill 1261 was passed, which set statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals. Following that, multiple state agencies worked on the greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap, identifying how that greenhouse gas reduction could be achieved and identifying strategies and specific reductions in different sectors of the economy. This spring, Senate Bill 21260 was passed, which requires the Transportation Commission to establish policies for MPOs and for CDOT to have greenhouse gas reduction requirements for their transportation plans. So this proposal that we're talking about tonight originated in the pollution reduction roadmap and is now required in statute. We're trying to do the rule overview in one slide tonight, so this is a very brief review of a somewhat complicated rule. So please feel free to ask questions. But there is existing statewide regulations on transportation planning, and this proposal is to revise those existing rules by creating greenhouse gas reduction targets that would apply for each MPO in the state, Metropolitan Planning Organization, and for CDOT in the non-MPO areas. There are 4 compliance years, starting with 2025 and going out to 2050. The rule would apply to the Regional Transportation Plan and the Transportation Improvement Program for the North Front Range MPO. And for CDOT, it applies to the 10-year plan and the 4-year prioritized plan in non-MPO areas only. Compliance is determined through travel demand modeling and air quality modeling, along with an off-model analysis of greenhouse gas mitigation measures, which are measures that are deemed to be not regionally significant, but still would have an impact on greenhouse gas emissions. If the greenhouse gas reduction levels aren't met, the consequence for the North Front Range MPO is that we have to use our CMAC and STBG funds on projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and CDOT would have to use the 10-year plan funds that were anticipated to go toward regionally significant projects to projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's a lot more information on CDOT's website, fact sheets, frequently asked questions, the red line, cost-benefit analysis. So there are resources on that site that are linked on this slide. So briefly, I want to cover the rulemaking schedule. The TC kicked off the rulemaking by authorizing it back in July. There is a 60-day written comment period that is going on right now and is concluding next week, Friday, on October 15th. The TC held 9 rulemaking hearings around the state. The last one was today, and they're scheduled to adopt the rule at their meeting in November. The next few milestones on this slide, I don't want to go into detail on today, but they address the timing requirements out of Senate Bill 260 for TC to consider this rule and for the North Front Range MPO and some other entities to update their plans in compliance with the rule, and that's in middle and late 2022. So on the North Front Range MPO side, I wanted to cover where we've been. A lot has happened in September. So we first brought you an overview of this rule at the September Council meeting. We sent in a first round of technical edits to CDOT on September 8th. On September 13th, the North Front Range sent a letter requesting data and sufficient time for public comment. We did receive a response from CDOT Executive Director Shoshana Liu indicating that they were working on the data and that they weren't making a decision on extending the public comment period at that time, that they were going to wait for more comments to be submitted to the state prior to making that decision. We held a discussion with TAC on September 15th and then a joint work session on September 16th, where we provided some additional data and analysis to the council and made a few decisions about how to approach some of the concerns that we have. On September 30th, there was a rulemaking hearing in Fort Collins that Chair Karsbeck and I attended and provided verbal testimony at that hearing. And there was another hearing on October 5th that originally we were planning to attend and provide testimony at, but we were able to cover all of the topics we wanted to cover at the hearing on the 30th, and there wasn't any new information that was made available to us in between those two dates, and so we decided to not voice any comments at the October 5th hearing. So that brings us to today, where we are hoping to approve comments that we can submit to CDOT prior to that October 5th deadline for public comment. We do see the possibility maybe later in October we might want to have a work session. It depends on if the public comment period is extended or if new information becomes available to us. So just wanted to put that out there that is a possibility. So a brief update on the data request that we submitted back on September 13th. We requested 5 pieces of data, and we've gotten a lot of that and been able to review it. There are 2 items that we have not yet received. One is the technical report on the modeling process. And this is important because there's been a lot of confusion among stakeholders about how this rule will actually work in real terms. You know, what is in the baseline, what is in the reduction level, what's the process for comparing those. And so we think this report will help clarify that for the stakeholders and help people to develop more meaningful comments on the rule. The other item we requested that we haven't received yet is corrections to the greenhouse gas reduction levels. And I'll be discussing this a little bit more in detail later on in the presentation.
Sweet graphics, by the way. I like this.
So because we haven't received all of the data, the comment letter that staff have drafted is not as comprehensive as we were hoping it would be because we're not able to react to these pieces that we haven't received. However, there are a number of other topics that we do think we can provide comments on and we should be submitting at this time, even though we haven't received all of the data that we've requested. So the comment letter that you received by email yesterday has 3 main sections. Start with the introduction. There are 2 key pieces in the intro I want to highlight. One is where we recommend an extension of the public comment period, just voicing that we still haven't received all of the data and we still think that it's important for that data to be available. And the second is what I call sort of the underlying statement driving our comments, that the North Front Range NPO has strong support for developing a data-driven, feasible, and effective rule for reducing greenhouse gas emissions resulting from the implementation of transportation plan. So it's kind of an overarching theme to the letter. The next section is rule context. And during this rulemaking process, there were a few comments that have been submitted by stakeholders or comments we've heard from CDOT that we thought merited some additional discussion and would impact how this rulemaking is being held. So they're not our recommendations, but they are some pieces of context to the rulemaking that we thought were important to discuss in our letter. The first is the importance of developing a clearly written and procedurally sound greenhouse gas rule. This comment is coming out of something we heard about the importance of getting this rulemaking done quickly and the fact that other policy documents will be developed subsequent to the rulemaking that can clarify any issues that can't be addressed in the rulemaking. And what we write in the letter is it's really important to have a strong foundation for those future supplemental policy documents. This rulemaking is a very public process. It's where we have a lot of stakeholders voicing their opinion. So it is the place to address any contentious issues and provide a solid foundation for those future supporting policy documents. The second item is on the amount of emission reductions that are needed from this rule to help the state achieve its greenhouse gas goals. Some of the other stakeholders have voiced their concern that this rule is not going far enough to reduce emissions and that the state won't be able to meet its goals if this rule isn't more aggressive. I'm going to advance to the next slide quickly. Well, that looks funny. Apologies for that graphic. But there are 7 strategies in the greenhouse gas roadmap to address emissions from transportation. The one we're talking about tonight is the first one on that table. The other 6 are going forward through other processes and other venues. They're either underway currently or they're scheduled to start in 2022. Collectively, they're intended to achieve a 4.7 million metric ton reduction of greenhouse gases. There are other strategies in place, including fleet turnover and electrification of transportation vehicles that are expected to achieve 8 million metric tons of reduction. So that adds up to the 12.7 identified in the plan. So there is no need for this rule to achieve 4.7 million metric tons of reduction. And furthermore, if you sign up the rule to do something it can't achieve, you could end up falling short of the overall goal. It's really important that each of these strategies be developed in a way that's feasible so it can actually achieve the reductions that it's assigned to it and cost effective. I'm not sure how to go back easily. Let's see if I can. Previous. Okay. The third item in rule context is the role of vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. This is another thing we've heard from other stakeholders, that the rule, in addition to setting greenhouse gas emissions reductions targets, should also have a targeted reduction for vehicle miles traveled. What we note in the letter is that Senate Bill 260 requires this rule to address greenhouse gas emission reductions. It doesn't require reductions in VMT. It requires consideration of VMT. When you look at the Clean Air Act, which has in a lot of ways provided a template for this rule, the Clean Air Act in its transportation control measures, or TCMs, has VMT reduction measures. It also has operations improvement measures, and it has vehicle scrappage measures. So all of those are important strategies that can be used to reduce emissions from transportation. And by only focusing on one set of measures, you're missing other opportunities. So the letter points out that it's important to look at all of the ways that all the strategies that are available to us to reduce emissions from transportation. All right, the next piece is the recommended improvements. This is the last major piece of the comment letter. There are 13 recommendations, but as we go through, you'll see that recommendation 12 is actually a grab bag of other recommendations that are more minor process improvements, so we group them together. I've put an asterisk next to the recommendations that we have not fully discussed at either the September Council meeting or the September work session. Maybe we discussed them in part or high level, but there's some more detail to add there. So I just wanted to flag those as we go through, that we haven't had a full discussion on those recommendations until tonight. And so we'll go through. This first recommendation in the comment letter is to remove or update the greenhouse gas baselines. What we write in there is that the greenhouse gas baselines currently in the proposed rule are based on the statewide travel model, and there are very good reasons for using the NPO model to set those baselines and to assess compliance. That would provide an apples-to-apples comparison and allow the NPO to more quickly update and test different strategies. The baseline values are also not accounting for increased electric vehicle shares. And so that would be important to include in the baseline, because as your vehicle fleet gets more efficient, the reductions you can get through planning measures decreases over time. And lastly, the baselines currently are based on a proxy of VMT share. Instead of considering the operating conditions and the fleet mix in each regional area, they took the statewide greenhouse gas emission amount and divvied it up among the regions based on VMT share. So our recommendation is to remove the greenhouse gas baselines from the rule and put them in a supporting policy document that would allow those fixes to take place. Alternatively, they could be retained in the rule and have those 3 issues addressed. The second recommendation is to set per capita greenhouse gas reduction levels. This would allow when changes to the MPO boundary occur, or when we have updated growth forecasts, that the greenhouse gas reduction levels would still be relevant given those changes. In California, they have a greenhouse gas standard for MPOs under Senate Bill 375, and they use a per capita approach as well. So we cite that in the letter. Recommendation 3 is to develop practicable greenhouse gas reduction levels. The letter states that reduction levels should be based on strategies that are within the control of MPOs and CDOT. The modeling that was conducted by CDOT, they used 3 different scenarios to test feasible ranges of greenhouse gas reduction levels, and ultimately chose the collectively exhaustive list, sort of an all of the above type approach to the reduction levels. So all of the strategies they tested are reflected in those greenhouse gas reduction levels, and they include measures that can't be implemented by MPOs or CDOT or are expected to occur through market forces, so not through any change in policy. Some examples of these include land use changes, tripling telework rates, expanding broadband access to more households, revising state healthcare regulations, and expanding transit service and reducing transit fares by 50%. The 5th one, that transit one, there is more of a role for CDOT on that. It does say that in the letter how CDOT has more authorities to provide funding, more ability to provide funding compared to the MPO, which is restricted with the federal funds that we have available and how we can provide funding to transit. But definitely the first 4 are not strategies that can be implemented by MPOs or CDOT. Recommendation 4 is to correct errors in the greenhouse gas reduction levels. And this gets back to that data, missing data item I mentioned earlier. The reduction levels in the rule for 2050 and other out years are unreasonably high given the anticipated electric vehicle shares in the out years. So the reduction levels in the rule do account for EV projections, whereas, as I said before, the baselines do not. What the reduction levels are accounting for is a 97% share of light-duty EVs in 2050, and yet at the same time saying that 0.7 million metric tons should be reduced by 2050. So we've been working with CDOT on this issue. We do think there was an error in transferring data between models and inadvertently applying light-duty VMT reductions to medium and heavy-duty vehicles. So that fix is underway. Recommendation 5 is to require reassessment of greenhouse gas reduction levels. This recommendation requests that at least every 4 years, the reduction levels are revisited to make sure they're still relevant and feasible given changes in EV shares and fleet fuel economy standards. What we're also recommending is that MPOs, CDOT, and the TC can request this feasibility review at any time, with the state interagency consultation team deciding through a consultation process whether to take up that request or not. But either way, it would require a review at least 4 years, and then the report would go to the TC, who could then decide if the rulemaking should be reopened, thus allowing the reduction levels to be changed. I spoke earlier about California, and they also require their Air Resource Board to revise the targets every 8 years with the option of revisiting every 4 years. So this recommendation is in line with California's approach as well. Recommendation 6 is to expand the implementers of greenhouse gas mitigation measures. I think we've covered this pretty well at previous meetings, that local governments often are the ones who are implementing measures that are defined as greenhouse gas mitigation measures in this rule, and their efforts should count. Recommendation 7 is to include operation strategies in the greenhouse gas mitigation measures. This gets back to the comment about using the full toolbox of tools to reduce our emissions. Recommendation 8 is to require a vote at the TC to deny waiver and reconsideration requests. I mentioned the waiver process earlier, that specific projects could go forward. The reconsideration request is if the TC determines that a plan is non-compliant, then the MPO or CDOT could request TC to reconsider that determination. What the rule currently is proposing is that the TC would have the option of taking up that request within a certain time frame, just 30 days or their next meeting. If they don't take it up, then it's automatically denied. So it wouldn't even have to go to the TC. They wouldn't have to vote to deny those requests.
That's like a pocket veto.
Yeah. So we're recommending that not be allowed, that they would have to go on record to consider the request and vote to deny it. Recommendation 9 is to remove or modify the requirement for tips. This is another one we haven't discussed yet as a group. The proposed rule applies to transportation improvement programs for MPOs in non-attainment areas. But there are non-attainment areas outside of the MPO, and the rule doesn't apply to the statewide transportation improvement program for those areas. So there's an inconsistency there in which documents are subject to the rule. So we're recommending removing that requirement for TIPs for MPOs in non-attainment areas. And TIPs have to be consistent with the long-range plan anyhow, according to federal regulations. And so the way the rule is structured currently, most likely the modeling would be the same, but the reporting might be sort of a duplicate effort and not very efficient use of time. So if the requirement for TIPs is retained, we are recommending that allowing it to be certified that the TIP is consistent with RTP so that a separate greenhouse gas transportation report doesn't need to be submitted. Recommendation 10 is to remove restrictions on CMAC funded projects. This rule, if the greenhouse gas reduction levels aren't met, the projects receiving CMAC are restricted to those that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But CMAC funding is designed for projects that reduce ozone precursors. And in the North Front Range, we award it to projects that are the most effective at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In the past, this has been transit alternative fuel buses or intersection and ITS projects, which have gone through a quantified analysis to determine that they're effective at reducing precursors. So we're recommending that the rule should not restrict eligible project types for CMAC to ensure that the most efficient use of resources can go toward ozone reduction. Recommendation 11 is to allow non-regionally significant projects funded with STBG to go forward, even if those reduction levels aren't met. This is how the rule is structured for the 10-year plan funds, that only those going toward regionally significant projects would be restricted in light of the important maintenance and operations needs of those funds, of those projects. And so we think the same logic should apply to the surface transportation block grant funds. Okay, recommendation 12 is the grab bag of all these different clarifications.
Otherwise, we'd be up to 25.
I know. I was going to read through them. I don't know how.
No, that's okay.
Okay, all right. We've talked about some of them too. All right. Recommendation 13 relates to the cost-benefit analysis. So it's not on the rule itself, but the cost-benefit analysis provides some important clarifications of how those reduction levels were determined and assessing the costs and benefits of the proposal and of alternatives that could be put in the rule, such as those other scenarios I mentioned. CDOT tested 3 scenarios for how the reduction levels could be set. So that's part of the CBA. And there are a few recommendations we have for clarifying and updating the CBA to be more accurate. So the first is the RTP project costs are totaled in the CBA, intended to represent the project costs across the state. The total that they're showing there is $28 billion, and that's much lower than the costs. We know I didn't do a full review, but for Dr. Cog and for North Front Range, for our most recently adopted RTPs, it's over $100 billion of expenditures that are planned over the horizon of those plans. So clearly they didn't take all the projects, or there's some mismatch there that we'd like to have clarified. The CBA also incorrectly states that RTPs are not fiscally constrained and that they do not account for operations and maintenance costs, but they do. They're federally required to do that. The strategy costs in Appendix A of the CBA appear to be too low for several strategies, given the unit costs and the methodology that was provided in that appendix. We did some calculations to try and match the numbers in the table, and every time we tried, we were getting 2 to 3.7 times higher cost than what were shown in the table. So either the methodology isn't accurate or the table isn't accurate, so we recommend clarifying that. And some of the unit costs appear to be too low and rely on out-of-state or nationwide sources that may not be applicable to Colorado. The CBA does not account for the cost of electric buses or the cost of reducing transit fares, even though those emission benefits are counted. And the CBA assumes that vehicle crashes are reduced in proportion to VMT and then counts the benefits from those safety improvements. However, this assumption fails to consider what we saw in 2020, where we had a substantial increase in fatalities at the same time we had a substantial reductions in VMT. With emptier roads, there's a lot more speeding and more fatal crashes. So accounting for that could either come in the form of accounting for the cost of the traffic calming infrastructure that would be needed to make sure that that doesn't happen if we have VMT reduction through this rule, or by removing the benefit considered as the from safety. So to wrap it up, we would like to hear your suggestions on these comments, what should be submitted, and hopefully we can come to consensus on the set of comments that will be submitted to the Transportation Commission. I do want to point out, as I mentioned, there are those 2 missing pieces of data that we'd still like to receive. One way you could help support that is the written comment period deadline is October 15th. And as I mentioned, Director Shoshana Liu said they were waiting to hear from more stakeholders on this issue. So if you think that more time should be needed, you could submit comments on behalf of yourself or your communities to that email address, reiterating the request for more time. And if we do get a public comment extension, we would potentially have revised comments that we would bring back to you either in a work session or a future meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor.
Oh, Medora, that's, I'm just smiling. I mean, look out, CDOT. This is the most smartest presentation with most insightful and thorough analysis and comments that I've seen in public life in terms of public comment on a complicated thing. I'm just sitting here smiling. They should, don't stay here and work here, but
They have said that already. They want to hire.
yeah, don't, if you, I mean, you obviously even went in their cost benefit analysis and looked at their criteria. I mean, it's the most impressive and insightful piece of work I promise you I've ever seen in a public comment. So that's all I have to say. I trust you completely. Send it in. But they shouldn't give you an extension of time. They'll get another one.
I'll hop in there and echo the mayor's comments. But I'll do so in a decidedly more simplistic way. When we go out to the playground and play greenhouse gas Red Rover, you're my first pick. I know it, and Commissioner Stevens and I have been somewhat involved in some of these work sessions, and I know that Medora specifically and Suzette have worked tirelessly on this, and obviously it shows, Medora, so thank you for your outstanding work. And you just stand out there and you read it, you just sound so pleasant. I don't know what the hell half of what you said was, but I know that you have worked so hard and done so well. And in what could be a politically charged rule, and it is somewhat, you have gone very pragmatically and looked at the technical aspects of this, and I think this is something that we all can get behind, and so I would certainly encourage you submit it quick. And then have we got a non-compete with her?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna go off of his theme and say Red Rover, but we're not sending you on over. We're gonna retain you over here. No, I would concur with the other comments that have already been said.
Mr. Stevens?
It's fantastic, and I think it's unfortunate. No offense, Will, that it goes over Will's signature and not yours, Medora, but it's really well put together. It's well argued. It's fantastic. So.
And you're helping them a lot.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
You're
Right.
saving them from a lot of mistakes that they're making on their calculate. Yeah, it's really.
Yeah, and I think our intent, I know Commissioner Stevens wants to make a comment, but I know our intent all along has been to make this work, not to, stand on pragmatism in any way, shape, or form, but we really want to make it work. We know it's in legislation. We want to make this the best rule that we can. I mean, Medora's done a great job at doing that.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yeah, thank you, Medora. I agree. I think we should move these comments forward. I think that they're really good. I think that they make the rule better. I like, kind of that you've found that California actually used some of these similar techniques in their process, because I think that I mean, I just think that lends weight to the argument that, you know, there's good reason for this. Maybe some of my fellow commissioners are not going to like that California is, but I think, you know, as far as, I think we should, I think these mirror a lot of the comments that you've already made in public comment, you and the mayor. But I do think that we should push these forward. I'm happy to also write written comments. I wonder if we have any sense of, I guess that they're waiting to hear from a lot of different groups to see if other people want the time extension. I know with CCI, the County Commissioners Group, that they were so impressed by Medora's comments. I think that they're sort of parroting those, and that's the comments that they're going to provide to the greenhouse gas rulemaking group. So, yeah. Anyway, I just think that they are really great. I agree with Mayor Arndt that that this is really insightful and this is really great work that you've done, and it's sort of hard to argue against what feels like really common sense arguments for making the rule better.
Anyone else online? Okay. Well, I'll just say thank you as well. This is fantastic. When you testified last week, I'll say that the other ones were kind of hard to follow sometimes, but yours was incredibly succinct. Ours was incredibly succinct, and no offense taken. I think they should know that that's absolutely your work. Midori had to say so many comments so quickly that they gave us extra time so that the Spanish translator could catch up. They had to stop her midway, but we got it all in.
Less support sign language.
Well, it sounds like we're all in support here. It says an action item. Is there a motion? Okay.
Second.
Mayor Randemeyer, second. Any final discussion on this? Does anyone oppose? Okay. That is accepted.
Just to note, though, that I abstained.
And thank you.
Yep. And
Commissioner Brackett's abstained.
at the end, I just would like to make a comment when
That's it. Go
we're
ahead.
ready. But I would like to add my thanks to Medora, to Suzette, for the MPO staff. The work that you all have done, and I've said this in many different settings because I've sat through a lot of these hearings, I've sat through a lot of public meetings and presentations, and I'm always saying you should go to Medora and use your slides. The slide you have on the timeline is the one that I've referred to through this whole thing, because to me it's been the most clear around what's the process and then the you are here piece of that. So I can't thank you enough for all of your work, the technical analysis, the hours and hours that you've put in. And again, echoing the comments tonight, the constructive input into the process, because again, there's a lot of comments being made about what people like or don't like, and it's too much of this and not enough of this. But the comments that you all have put together and are submitting offer a lot of great, in my opinion, just speaking as one commissioner, very clear suggestions on how to make the rule better, more implementable, more effective over time. So I'm very thankful to work with with all of you and to have had the benefit of the information and the analysis that you all have done. And I know so many of the members of the North Fort Range MPO have testified at the meetings as well, and I really appreciate that. I mean, that's what this takes. This is hard work. It's complicated. Yes, there's some examples from California, but a lot of this is new, and it's new for us in Colorado, and it's new in our context. So the work that you've done is truly amazing, and I think from my, again, singular perspective, will be hopefully very effective in helping to refine the rulemaking process and the outcome from it. So I look forward to that. I am hopeful that the timeline can be adjusted to address the concerns. And so if more people have that thought, please send in your comments. It makes a difference. So we'll see. But what I have asked, I have shared all of the comments that you all have provided with CDOT staff and with the ad hoc Transportation Commission committee that's been working on this, and my hope is we can get an answer on the timeline early next week, because otherwise the deadline is coming on the 15th, and it doesn't help people to find out on the night of the 14th that it's been extended. So my hope is we can get information soon. But again, just thank you for how well you've done this work, how clear you've requested the information. And I appreciate all the work on behalf of the CDOT staff as well to be responsive to this. And from my understanding, you guys have had a lot of great collaboration and technical meetings to try to weed through all of it. So I think real kudos all the way around to the work, and the outcome will be better policy for the public and for our state. So thank you.
So just to follow up on that, I did have a conversation with CDOT staff and asked them sort of how do we go about, we've already requested an extension, but now that we're getting really down to the wire, it's pretty clear that we do need a extension request. They did say that they are meeting with the ad hoc committee on Tuesday, and so that we should have hopefully an answer on Tuesday. So,
Yep,
so get your letters in before Tuesday.
yeah. That's consistent with what I was told through the state attorney's office as well. So.
All right.